All right, today we have a special episode lined up. We are thrilled to be interviewing Dan Burke, who is the brilliant mind behind Fencing Time Live, which a lot of people know as a tool that is indispensable in the world of fencing. In today's episode, Dan's going to take us on kind of a journey through Fencing Time Live, especially the scheduling aspect of it and how tournament organizers use Fencing Time to schedule a tournament that runs smoothly and on time. So we'll talk about the functionality there and um, Dan will give us a kind of a behind the scenes peek. And as those of you watching on YouTube know, there's a video version of this episode. So if you're listening to this, which is how most of our episodes are distributed, then be sure to check the show notes for the YouTube link or go to the USA Fencing YouTube channel because Dan's going to be showing some slides that might be enhanced if you're actually watching instead of just listening. If you just want to listen, that's fine too. We'll do our best to describe what you're seeing and make this a valuable conversation. So, a bit about Dan. We said he's the creator and developer of Fencing Time, which is a tournament management application that anybody involved with fencing knows all about. It's used by clubs, the FIE, and of course, us at USA Fencing. And then beyond that, Dan is a bout committee chair at regional events, an occasional referee. He lives in the Pacific Northwest and competes in foil and a little bit of epee locally and at VetNax. And he does all this while holding down a day job. So, Fencing Time Live is not his day job. So, we're really grateful that he was able to take away some time from his day job to join us. So, with that introduction out of the way, hey, Dan, thanks for joining.
I'm sure thing. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is great. And you and I have talked before. I'm really excited to put this on the record, so to speak, about all the work that you've done with Fencing Time. So, before we talk about that, though, can you tell us like your fencing journey? How long have you been fencing, and what brought you into the sport?
Yeah. So I started fencing. It was 1989. Right before I went off to college. I thought, oh, this would be kind of a cool thing to do as get some exercise while I was in college. So I fenced just casually with the school club team for about a year and a half until my workload got so much that I didn't have time to fence. Um, and after graduating, I had jobs and didn't pursue fencing until around year 2000 when the Sydney Olympics were underway. And I thought, gee, this would be kind of cool to watch watch the fencing. Um, and that got me to look locally to see what fencing clubs were around. And it turned out that the club I've been with since then, Rain City, was just a few miles from my house and had actually opened in May, and this was November. So I started going and got got hooked again, you know, mostly first just competing and fencing, but then I got sort of into the tournament organization side, which sort of leads into the birth of Fencing Time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess I've been back at it since 2000. So 24 years, which is hard to believe.
So you've seen a lot of the growth of fencing and the evolution of it. So for those of us who have been around the sport for less time than that, what was it like competing in tournaments like before Fencing Time? Competing in, organizing, whatever angle you want to look at before there was a tool like Fencing Time that really made it easy to see who's fencing where and when.
Well, back in the old days, mostly everything was done on paper.
Okay.
You would show up at a tournament, um, and they would basically fill out like an index card with your name and your rating. And to do the seating, after everyone was there, they would sort the cards by rating, and then they would lay out the pools by physically, you know, putting them on a table, laying them out in kind of the snaking pattern that, the software does,
Mm.
and is spec ruled. And, they'd manually check to see, they'd have like what club you were on part of and what division also on your index card. And so they'd manually, swap people around to avoid club mates and that sort of thing. And then they'd fill out a paper pool sheet with the names. They'd go off and fence it like usual. And then after the math was computed from the polls, which, now, of course, the program does for you, but
Right.
you'd have to total up all the touches scored and touches received. They would then translate that onto everyone's card, and then they would sort them again by your pool result, and then they would fill out a tableau by hand, putting people in the right place. Um, all the while, there was usually nothing in terms of like posting, seedings or results or anything. If you wanted to if you wanted to see the tableau, you'd have to come over to the ballot committee table and look at the handwritten tableau. So this was mostly for local events. There
Right.
were no regional events, so that program hadn't started yet. Um, and it worked. I mean, it wasn't terribly efficient. A gust of wind could, blow your index cards all day, and your pools would have to be redone.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so it was a little bit primitive.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, at the Nax, they were using an old piece of software that um, a guy named, I can't remember his name. Another guy named Dan, I forget his last name at the moment. Um, but he had written some software that USA Fencing was using, and that was how they ran the Nax. And this is back, I mean, when I started, Nax were still 24 strips, 32 strips. I think Summer Nationals was maybe 48 or 50 something strips. So it was
Not the
a lot.
105 that we're gonna have in Columbus here in a couple weeks
Yeah.
after we're recording this. Um, yeah, I can only imagine, like, for some of these event sizes now, like Junior Men's Epee, 400 something, like, that many cards, you just couldn't do it. I mean, it would take you, hours to make that many pools and using all the rules that, are now just programmed into the software, right? It's like given the tournament size. So one more question about the olden days, I'm putting that in quotes. Like, were tournaments, given all of the manual processes that you're describing, were the tournaments end later, or were the sizes smaller and so that the timing was about the same?
Um, they were smaller in general,
Okay.
because it's also in the days before things like Ask Fred,
Mm,
where even publicizing your tournament was difficult. And
right.
back then you would print out like maybe a flyer and send it to the clubs in the area and hope they would hang it up on like their wall so people would know about the tournament and come. So, the events weren't that big. So, even though, you'd get maybe a 25% event would be a pretty good size for a local event. And things would take longer just because, again, you have to do all the tabulation and sorting of things and seating and just a lot of the manual paperwork.
Right.
I mean, the fencing itself pretty much was the same. But there was more time, you'd finish the pools and sometimes you'd have to wait like 30 minutes before the Ds would start because the bout committee's doing all the math and sorting things. So things tended to be, they would be longer compared with a comparable size event these days.
Yeah, totally. So, fencing time, what was the inspiration there? What was the genesis of that, um, invaluable tool that we now all kind of just feel like is a natural part of our fencing experience?
So at my club, every month we would run a couple events. It was like a Thursday night E and under foil that they would run every month. And then we also had just lots of internal events, more just practice for fun kinds of things. And there was some program, I don't even remember what it was called, but there was a program that someone had written to run the fencing tournaments. And my coach was trying to use it for one of these events. And he was just going crazy trying to figure it out. It wasn't very easy to use. It was not intuitive. Um, it it just wasn't that great. I mean, it was one of the only things available. because the one the USFA used wasn't available to the wider public. And so I'm standing there over his shoulder watching him struggle with this program. And I think to myself, well, heck, I could write a better
Mm.
program than this. And it also was kind of an excuse to learn some new technology that had just come out. Which, in the software world, you learn pretty much by doing
Sure.
rather than reading a book. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to build this app, which, I named Fencing Time kind of after the terminology of, like a tempo of fencing time. And it was intended really just for our club to use. And, it took me, I don't remember exactly how long to build it, maybe 6 months or 9 months to build the very basic version. Because at that time, it really just did, you know, putting in the fencers, creating the pools, tabulating the results, creating the Ds and, running people through that and having the final results.
Just
A lot of
digitizing the index card system, right? Just a strict, like, take this manual process and make it digital.
right. Yeah, it was basically just get the basics of a tournament so you didn't have to do all that paperwork.
Gotcha.
Um, and so yeah, we were using that at the club, and then I gave copies of it to some of the other local clubs that were running tournaments, and they were starting to use it. And word got around, friends in other parts of the country, and I was like, "Oh, sure, I'll give you a copy. You can play with it." And eventually, I realized, this is something that everyone could find useful. So I, sort of, I wrote an instruction manual and kind of polished it so that it was more of a professional product than just a hobby thing. I built a website where you could download it. And I even, just to date how long ago this was, because I think this was like 2001 or so, 2002, I would burn copies of it to CDs
Mhm.
and printed some little flyers. And I would leave the flyers and the stack of CDs on the table at the Max where, you could pick up, you know, tournament brochures or, all the flyers for summer camps and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Were you
so yeah,
selling it at this point? Were you, like, selling it, or were you just like, I'm giving this to people who are in my same boat"?
yeah, I started, I added the licensing at that point.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
pay, I forgot what the price was back then. It was not too much. It was, I think, about $50 or something like that. Um, and, and back then when they would pay me, I would then send them a CD with the full version of it because the one that was on the ones that I put out at the Nax was just like a trial version.
Gotcha.
Then eventually over the years, obviously I moved to just a digital download
Right.
and buy a license online. So I was very happy to stop burning CDs and packaging them in bubble wrap mailers and sending them
Yeah, of
each week.
course, saving you some trips to the post office.
Yeah.
So, we've been talking about the tournament organization side, but also there's the fan slash fencer slash parent caregiver side of just following a tournament, which, thanks to your development, it's super easy to, follow a fencer through their journey, and you've got some really, innovative tools for doing that. So, like, what I guess my question is, what are you most proud of about that side of it? The fact that it's so easy for someone who's, because I do this every weekend during the FIE. During the FIE season, I'm following Team USA when that tournament is running with fencing time, which I'm always hopeful that they are, honestly. So if it's a fencing time tournament, I'm like, okay, thank goodness this is going to be easy to follow. And then I'm checking in to see how Colin Heathcock is doing, and it makes it very easy to follow. I can even see live in real time. So, like, talk about that side of it, not the tournament organization side, but more just the fan side.
Yeah. Well, in the original version, there were no live results.
Okay.
It was originally, it was still a, print out the tableau and print out the pools and hang them on the wall.
So you didn't go
So
to
the skill,
fencingtimelive.com, find the tournament and all that. This was all just stuff that was happening locally on someone's computer, in other words.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then some years later, I was like, okay, I should have a ability for people to publish the live results to a website. And for years, even before Fencing Time Live came along, I had the ability to, you could publish their results, but you basically had to put them like on your own website. So a club would have it on their website. And it was a little technically difficult to do. You needed some technical know-how to be able to set that up. Um, so eventually I realized, I should build this kind of centralized repository for results, which would get rid of the sort of people would have to hunt down like where are the results for this tournament? What's the club website that has it, or is it a division website? And it eliminated all the technical challenges that people had to get that even set up from
Yeah.
like the tournament organizer side. And so I built Fencing Time Live. And I think the most gratifying thing about it, aside from just it becoming a much more public face of fencing time, is I had no idea how widespread it was used. I would be selling licenses they come in every few days, depending on what part of the season it was. But as time, especially once it got certification by the FIE and
Right.
could be used wide, I was getting orders from all over the world. And I didn't really keep track of that. But once Fencing Time Live was out there, suddenly I was like, oh my God, it's
Yeah,
running
yeah.
50 it's on every weekend from like every corner of the globe. So that blew my mind, but was really, I don't know, it was really gratifying to see that.
Yeah, anybody who goes to fencing time and, if you click off of USA and click, for the whole world, you can see in season, any given weekend, there's all these, youth tournaments. Sometimes I do click into those just to see like, what's happening in Brazil or, Sweden or whatever, right? To, what kind of tournaments are going on. It's really fun. So, okay, well, I could talk about this aspect all day, but I want to move into another reason we brought you on, which is to chat about tournament scheduling, which obviously ties directly into fencing time and is part of your role as well. So at the April NAC, we had a vet town hall, and you were the guest of honor there, and a lot of our vet fencers were able to ask you questions about why certain events start at certain times. And that was a very popular presentation. The only problem was that only those in the room were able to see it. So that's one reason we wanted to have you on, was to discuss, kind of give us that presentation, and then I'll chime in with a couple of questions if I have them. But if you don't mind sharing your screen and showing us that presentation that you gave there, um, I think it'd be really fascinating to people and would allow that message from that April NAC to spread a little bit wider.
Okay. Let me get that up on the screen here. Two, three. Okay. Huh. So, so this presentation mostly focuses on national events.
Mhm.
As some people may know, I have been doing the scheduling, assisting USA Fencing with scheduling all of the NAC, the summer nationals and JOs, and even some of the SJCCs now, for quite some time. Um, been probably at least 8 years, maybe 10 years now. Can't quite remember. Um,
So essentially, USA Fencing, like our events team will say, okay, Dan, during these 4 days, we have these events. Um, go have fun. You're the one who says, okay, this is going to be on this day at 8 a.m. This is going to be on this day at 1 p.m. Am I understanding that right?
yeah, yep.
Okay, got it.
Um, so yeah, I'll go into the scheduling process, but
Yeah, please.
to, to sort of start out with the sort of some guidelines or warnings about scheduling. I don't know, I call them inconvenient truths because when when we are scheduling things, there's just a lot of things that have to be taken into account.
Mhm.
Um, there are things that you just can't avoid. The first thing is that we have a limited number of resources. Primarily, that's strips and referees. For NACs, obviously, it includes replay pods, and ultimately, it comes down to time because we can't run the tournaments till 3 in the morning. So, these are the limitations that have to be considered when doing the scheduling.
Yeah, I think everybody appreciates that the tournaments don't go till midnight or later. And in fact, in some venues, we actually can't. They would kick us out, right? So it's
Yeah.
more than just consideration to family members and fencers.
Well, there's also an obscure rule. I think it's somewhere buried in the athlete's handbook
Mm.
that states that no bouts can start after midnight.
Oh, well, there you go. So I actually didn't know that, and I've read that handbook, so that's interesting.
Yeah, there have been a few rare cases where that had to be overridden, and they had to actually call an emergency meeting of the board of directors to get them to vote to waive that rule.
Oh, wow.
I think that's happened on the thankfully rare occasions where like the equipment didn't show up because of
Wow.
some snowstorm or some problem, and so everything didn't get started until late in the day because the equipment wasn't there until the first day of competition.
That makes sense.
But anyway, going back to my list of inconvenient truths, um, when doing scheduling, it's really important that we have to take into account the overall greater good. A lot of people tend to focus on their schedules for the events that they are fencing, but as a scheduler, I have to equally look at everything. I can't favor one weapon over another or one age category over another. And there are some priorities around, like point events get a little more priority, but in general, we have to take into account the greater good because there are thousands of people fencing, which leads into the other unfortunate truth is that because of that, it's impossible to make everyone happy.
Mm.
Uh, every time you do a schedule, there's always some people that grumble that it's not convenient for them, which unfortunately is true. But there's really nothing you can do about that because again, you can't you can't make everyone's schedule optimal for them.
Right.
Which ultimately means that compromises have to be made. When I'm doing the scheduling, it really comes down to, balancing the number of events each day, the number of fencers that will be fencing, um, again, allocating resources in a smart way. And eventually, you just have to make some compromises. And that's just a fact of life. And if people realize that, I think it'll make a lot of people more understanding of why things may not be ideal for them. And again, I try to spread these compromises out across the season, across the events, across the age categories, across the genders, so that one particular group isn't always being inconvenienced. You know, I try to spread it around so that everyone has a little bit of pain every now and then, but also they also get, schedules that may be more beneficial to them occasionally.
So in other words, like junior women's saber, might be 8 a.m. on the very first day, 8 a.m. on Friday, um, at one tournament, but then the next tournament you're going to try to, and it doesn't always work out, but the next tournament you're going to try to maybe make them 2 or 3 p.m. on Saturday or Sunday at a time that, for a high school student is a little bit more convenient. Is that a good example?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, when um, before the season starts, once the event combinations have been decided, uh, I'll work to lay out the schedules for each NAC, um, and JOs. So like events are on what day. Um, and I expect actually that's probably going to start soon now that we've, I think, finalized on what events are at each NAC next season.
Right. So the day
Um,
schedules are the next step in that, knowing which events are happening on each of those days. I got you.
right. Yeah, and I'll try definitely. I put together a spreadsheet where I keep track of okay, if women's saber is or junior women's saber say is on a Friday, then at the next NAC or the one after, I'll try to put it on the weekend. So I try to balance weekend and weekday times for across all the weapons
Yeah, yeah,
so that one weapon's not always on a school day.
yeah.
So
Makes total
again,
sense.
there's limitations about how much I can do that, but I've got a spreadsheet that I'm tracking everything and juggling things around to do that as much as I can. With all that said about compromising and trying to make things equal, um, ultimately it's sort of a fact that Division One tends to take priority if there's kind of a call to be made between two events. Since Division One events are basically our pinnacle events for choosing national teams, and not just Division One, but junior and cadet also kind of fall in there right behind Division One.
Right.
Those are picking world teams. Their needs take a little bit of priority. An example would be if there's a World Cup for, say men's foil the following weekend after the NAC, I'll try to put the men's foil event, the Division One men's foil event, or junior men's foil on Friday or Saturday, so that they have more time to travel to the World Cup the following weekend.
That makes sense.
Um, so those are sort of the other considerations that I wind up having to put into the scheduling. Okay, so that leads into kind of what I was alluding to just a minute ago, it, day schedules, which, like I said, it's basically once the dates and locations have been determined, I'll put together the what events are on what day for all the entire season. Although I don't do it for summer nationals because that's a whole separate monster on its own. The big thing that I need when I do this is I need to know the number of strips that we'll have. And what I'll do is I will go and I'll make projections about the event sizes based on historical data, projected growth. So, I need basically the number of fencers and the number of strips so that I can put together a schedule that's somewhat balanced. So the way I predict the attendance is I assume a 5 to 10% growth in the numbers each year. One thing which people frequently ask is why can't you just predict that? And a lot of people ask, oh, why can't you do the event times earlier
Right.
rather than wait until the entry deadline? Um, and it turns out that the attendance numbers are much more variable than one would think. Um, there's a, I've got, I think I have something like 10 or 12 years of data that shows how sometimes the numbers just take a huge nosedive or have a huge spike. It varies greatly based on which, what time of year it is, where the NAC is located, if there's holidays and things like that, and what other events are at that NAC, the combinations. Some of them tend to draw more fencers because they can fence 2 or 3 events, while others are smaller if there's not as much crossover. So the attendance numbers are a bit trickier than you would think. I was a little surprised by that when I started doing this. The only thing that's consistent is that growth is if the numbers are going up, it's at least 5 to 10%, which I guess that's a good problem to have
Sure.
because we more people that want to fence.
So let's talk about an example there then, as we kind of I know we're talking about day schedules, but jumping ahead to the time schedule. So let's say, for example, that we lived in a universe where you put out those time schedules right at the beginning when the calendar was announced. And so not only did you know which events were going to be on this random Saturday in April, but you also said these are the times that they're all happening. And then March rolls around and the registration closes. And what could go wrong if you had already announced all the different times for the events happening on that day?
Yes, so that's a great question. So let's say that we've got, let's say, I don't know, let's say we have 65 strips at the snack in question.
Uh-huh.
If I project the numbers out, you know, months in advance, and I schedule, let's say, 3 events that start at 8 a.m. and I've scheduled them based on the numbers, and I basically am filling all 65 strips
Right.
with that start at 8 a.m. based on my projection. Well, when the entry deadline passes, if the projection is higher than higher than what I projected, and suddenly, let's say, the numbers were much greater, and in each of the 3 events, you've got, say, 20 additional fencers that I projected. Well, each of those events, that's 3 more pools. So suddenly, instead of having 65 strips worth of pools, you have 74 strips worth of pools, but we don't have more strips. So suddenly you're in a bind because you might have to then double flight an event.
Right.
And if you flight the event, then the events that you had scheduled for, say, 2 o'clock, suddenly they might be delayed because that morning event now is going to still be on those strips
Yeah.
when if you hadn't double flighted, they wouldn't be. So,
The problem just cascades all day until it's nearing midnight and you haven't finished all the events, right?
yeah. So, I mean, by waiting, you really avoid those kinds of problems, I mean, and even a small number of fencers, if each event grew by 1 pool, that still could be too much.
Yeah.
Um, and you'd have to suddenly start double flighting and, that delays everything. So, there's a very solid reason behind why we have to wait till we have accurate numbers. Cause again, sometimes my projections are on, sometimes they're, I project on, I over project just because it happens to be that a certain act doesn't draw as many people as we thought,
Right.
but more often than not, the numbers are greater than my projections. And so, I mean, over time, I try to adjust them to account for that, but the sport seems to keep growing at a faster pace than even I can keep up with.
Yeah. And there's so many variables, like you said. And someone might say, well, if you need 9 more pools, then just add 9 more strips. But when I've talked to Glenn Hollingsworth, who's our director of events, who makes these detailed CAD drawings for the venues, there's some venues where you literally could not fit, 1 more strip, let alone 9, right? So it's truly we need to, by we I mean you, need to deal with the hand you're dealt, right? Play the hand you're dealt
Right.
and find a way to make it work.
Well, and even not just finding strips. I mean, even if you were able to get more strips into the venue last minute, you still need with 9. If you have 9 more strips, you need at least 9 additional
Yeah,
referees.
yeah,
Usually they have a multiplier. So, 9 strips, you probably need 12 or 13 additional referees. Um, Hiring referees last minute can be difficult and
sure.
expensive. So, yeah, there's just so many potential problems that come up if you have to scramble because your projections were off. So, anyway, so after I've created the day schedules for all the NACs and JOs and presumably also the SJCC, um, I'm not the only one who looks at it. I pass this along to the review committee, which has people from both the tournament committee, the referees commission, the national office, the high performance group, replay, and actually we've recently added some representatives from the coaches. I think there's 3 coaches, one for each weapon, that's now on the review group, and they actually had some input onto the summer nationals schedule. So that was a recent addition, I think, after one of the board meetings. So once the group, they'll review it, um, point out any potential issues with, again, if I missed some, sort of balancing again, maybe the weapons across weekends or weekdays. They'll call any issues or things like that. They'll make adjustments, and ultimately they'll approve the set of schedules, and then that goes off to the national office to be published. Okay, so when creating these day schedules, there's actually a huge list of criteria that I'm supposed to follow. There's a document that I was given when I started doing this, which had a list of over 20 guidelines that I was supposed to meet. And they were grouped into sort of must follow these rules, things that really would be good, and then things that would be nice if possible. You know, there's a lot of, like I had mentioned with the Division One events, this additional constraints like with scheduling around World Cups, things like that. So those are a little more variable, while the big list is, that would be a good example of the thing that's on that list is, for example, with the vet ages, you can't have, say, vet 40 women's foil and vet 40 women's saber on the same day, or maybe vet 50 would be a better example, because there are people who are fence multiple weapons in the same age category.
Right.
And having both events on the same day, you're denying them the ability to, try to make both the foil team and the saber team.
Whereas, no one's going to be fencing both vet 40 and vet 50 women's foil, right?
Right.
Because you can't be in two. I see. Okay. So that's why you see those clusters of, with the vet event specifically, all the vet women's foil age events are on the same day, not necessarily the same time.
Right. There's other guidelines about like proximity of events, with like, junior and cadet should be close to each other if they're at the same NAC. Ideally you wouldn't put junior on Friday and cadet on Monday, because there's generally a lot of crossover between those two.
Right.
Again, that's one of the softer rules, which sometimes has to be broken, but, there's all these guidelines are just, I've internalized them, and, they make a lot of sense. Their goal is to both maximize the number of events people can fence, and also to, try to give them adequate rest between events, things like that.
Sure.
Like I had mentioned earlier, I try to balance the weekend and weekday distribution over the season. And this is where we start to see some interesting opinions where everyone's preferences vary. And like I had mentioned earlier, it's impossible to satisfy everyone.
Right.
A few examples include, if you've got 2 events, say junior and cadet, do you schedule it where junior is on, say Friday, then you have a day of rest on Saturday, and then cadets on Sunday? Some people prefer that because they want to rest between events. Other people want it junior on Friday, cadet on Saturday, so that that's one less day that they have to take away from school, or, a night at the hotel. Again, these are, every individual's different as to what they prefer. And, generally we put them closer together, just the sequential days rather than having rest days. Or if there's a rest day, I'll put an event that people could fence maybe, but they don't have to. Again, it's one of those things that you can't make everyone happy, because everyone's got a different opinion. And this is another one of those things that I try to spread out over the season if there's no, no other option.
Right.
Another preference that people can be rather vocal about is in the vet categories is whether we have the age group vet events before the combined or the combined before the age group.
And combined, for
Uh,
those who don't fence vets yet, is anybody 40 and up fences in one single event, right? So whether you're 45 or 75, you're fencing in that one event.
yep.
I see. So some people want one first and some want the other to come first in the order.
Yeah. The age specific ones are the ones that count towards placement, in the running for the national team.
Right.
And so those are arguably the more important event.
Sure.
People want to fence that first because, they don't want to do the combined first because if they maybe injure themselves, then they can't fence in the one that counts.
Yep.
There's other people that would like to have the combined event first. So it's kind of a warm up for the real one. So, again, there's valid reasons for both ordering.
Yeah.
And generally the larger, at least we've traditionally put the age group ones first and then the combined, because again, combined is really kind of a just for fun. There's no
Yeah.
team it's based on it. And I think the vet committee is actually going to be doing a poll of the vets that are fencing at the NACs frequently to find out what the preference is.
Oh yeah. I'm glad you
Um,
said that because we did send that out. So if you're a vet fencer listening to this, you should have gotten that poll in your email. So I'm glad you said that. I mean, and you could apply that same opinion to like Div 1 and Junior, right? Like I want to do
yeah,
Div 1 first, or I want to do Junior first, and warm up for the Div 1 for people obviously who are the right age to fence both.
yep, yeah. So again, the orders that we've been using mostly are, I mean, we'd say, well, with the vets, it's been pretty consistent. Although if the voting, if the poll comes back and tells us that they want it combined first, then, okay, we can schedule it that way.
Yeah.
With Div 1 and Junior, that one is more based on, because those events are so huge, those are based on how can I fit both of them into the schedule.
Gotcha.
And so to flip, all throughout the season.
Sure.
And like that perfectly rolls into the ultimate rule when creating a schedule is to make it all fit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Given the sizes of our events these days and the fact that our events are growing faster than we can add strips and referees, it ultimately comes down to a rather complicated puzzle of trying to squeeze everything in and make everything fit such that, we're not there till midnight each night.
Right.
And I'll mention that Summer Nationals is a mirror itself. It is, I mean, this year, I think you said or maybe it was in the newsletter that went out today, that it's the biggest fencing event ever run. Every year it seems to be the biggest one. It just keeps breaking
Right.
its own record.
6,200 individuals, 13,000 entries, and 105 strips is the latest numbers I saw. So that's yeah, good luck.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much that has to be taken into account when scheduling Summer Nationals because there's so many crossovers between, junior to cadet to Y14 to Y12 to Y10, and then you sprinkle in Div 2 and Div 3. And
Yep.
there's just so much that has to be, planned on that. And
I talked
ultimately,
to the father of one young woman who's fencing 7 events, I think, at Summer Nationals, and a couple of different weapons. But yeah, that's the type of thing that you're having to account for, is that you're going to have crossover. Not that everybody's going to fence 7 events, but just that there are so many different combinations of what people want to do.
right. Yeah. It really is challenging to, come up with something that everyone will be happy with, but, you do our best, just because that's really all that we can do.
Yep.
and see what, see see what we can put together. Um, and yeah, that's also why we don't try to do this at the beginning of the season. I think that our whole day schedule comes along. Can't remember when I did it this year. I think it was in April or so, maybe. I don't remember. But usually it's based on looking at how big the events were during the season and
Right.
trying to help them use that to project, how much growth there'll be at summer nationals.
Yeah, you've got more data to work with at that point.
Yeah. So the next part of scheduling is the check-in times, which is, again, we kind of talked a little bit about this. Uh, so just to recap, after the regular entry deadline, that's when we do the check-in times because it's based on the number of actual entries. Um, and it also factors in if we've been able to increase the number of strips, or if rarely we've had to decrease them. There have been cases when we don't have as much space as we had thought, and I have to plan things on a smaller number of strips, but thankfully that's
Right.
very rare.
Like there's a
Uh,
column
uh,
in the way of where we thought we were going to put a strip or something like that, right?
yeah, well, I think in Salt Lake in April, we lost a room with 8 strips or something on the last day, I think it was.
Right.
Uh, and luckily, the last day tends to be a little lighter, so we were able to adapt that easily.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, again, um, as I had mentioned earlier, that the scheduling, choosing what times is heavily influenced by the number of pools that we are going to need. And we try to avoid double flighting foil and epee as much as we can. Saber always gets double flighted because it you know, goes fast. And if we didn't do that, then we'd have to, well, we wouldn't be able to have the events the size that we have. Um, on the last day, this is something which people have wondered about. On the last day, a lot of times we will double flight all of the events and start them all early, or almost all of the events. And people think that's crazy. Why are you doing that? And it turns out that the day ends sooner when you do that. Because if you followed the traditional pattern of, you have some events in the morning that are single flighted, and then you start another event at 2 p.m. Well, that 2 p.m. event's not going to wrap up till, maybe 7, 8 p.m. And of course, the venues needs to be broken down and the hall needs to be cleared out that evening or that night. If you double flight them, if you start all the events in the morning and double flight them, speaking for foil and epee, that takes 4 hours to do the pools, so 2 flights of 2 hours each, roughly. So that takes you from 8 a.m. to noon to finish the pools. And then you do the Ds. And by about 2, 3 o'clock, most of the events are down to like the round of 16. And the vast majority of fencers are finished maybe around 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and actually can catch a flight home that evening. While like I said, if we put everything in, or if we had some events that started at 2, then those events will wrap up late in the evening and people will have to stay an extra night. And it also makes it harder to break down the venue. So double flighting doesn't seem intuitive, but it actually gets the day finished quicker for the majority of the fencers. And also another factor is that just like the fencers start leaving in the afternoon of the last day, the referees also start leaving. So if we're trying to start a 220 person event at 2 o'clock, after the pools are done, half of the referees might leave to catch a flight. So in addition to, fencers wanting to leave, we start losing referees, and that slows things down. So that's the reasoning behind the double flighting on the last day, mostly at night. When doing the schedule, in addition to, um, just using the strips optimally, you also need to balance the referee usage. You you try to have an equal distribution of referees across all the weapons because you have some referees that only do one weapon. And so if you don't have an event going on, say in epee, then all of your epee refs are basically idle. And that's not an efficient use of their time and the expense to bring them out. So we try to have events in each weapon going at the same time, just so that all the referees can be working and it's more efficient for everything. One thing which has over the years become a bigger and bigger issue is lining the events up to arrive at the replay pods in the final strip. This didn't used to be a problem because back when I started, there was no replay. And so there really wasn't much that had to be worried about, except I think we did have a final strip. But that was, you just needed the gold medal match up there rather than, needed to account for eight, replay pods or eight replay strips and half a dozen events wanting to use them at the same time. So we try to schedule things so that there's not a crazy rush for the replay, because when that happens, things get backed up while one event's on the strips and another one's waiting to get on the replay strips, and it just slows things down. And that's especially a problem when you've got vet events, because the vet events, you have 4 age categories each day, and you usually have a men's set of events and a women's set of events. So that's 8 events plus, um, or 9 if you count vet 80 actually, or 10, I mean. Um, and then of course there's the other events going on, which could be Div 1 or could be juniors. So, when you've got the events, the next with the vet events, you have a huge demand on the replay strips. And so you really have to balance things or try to schedule things so that they don't get backed up. And once again, this is, there's the issue of personal preference here. Some people prefer morning events. Some people prefer afternoon events. Speaking as someone that doesn't like to wake up early, I hate morning events, but sometimes I don't have a choice. And even my event starts at 8 a.m. just because that's how the schedule has to work. Being on the West Coast, I know it sucks to be fencing at what is 5 a.m. my time, but there's no way to start everything in the, at 11 a.m. and make everyone happy. Cause again, we would be there till 2 in the morning if we did that. And, of course, also, there's the people that prefer the morning because then they can be finished and get out and catch their flight or start driving home earlier. So again, this is one of those, you can't make everyone happy because it's just, everyone's got a different preference. Once I've finished doing the time schedules, I send it out to the same review group that did the review of the day schedules. And they'll point out any concerns they might have. The most common concern that they'll point out is if I have a case where, let's say Div 1 is the morning or in the morning, but junior was in the same weapon was in the afternoon the day before. So juniors that might also be fencing Div 1, they'll have been fencing till 8 p.m. and then they have to show up for Div 1 the next day at 8 a.m. That's not ideal in terms of giving them some rest. So, again, I try to schedule things to not do that. Sometimes it's not possible to avoid. And so, the review group might point out things like that might be problematic. And sometimes I can shift things by an hour here and there to give people a little more rest. And then, of course, once it's been reviewed and everyone's signed off on it, then it goes to the national office to be published. So that's the end of my presentation. There was one other thing which I was going to mention that this was a vet specific comment, which was that the the vet events that are scheduled at 8 a.m. tend to be saber. And the reason for that is that the saber events are fast, and when they're vet events, they're fairly small. And so the the use of the replay strips is actually quite efficient. What happens is that if the saber events start at 8 a.m., they will only need, they'll be ready to go to the replay strips by maybe 11 a.m. And at 11 a.m., nobody else needs the replay pods because they're still fencing their pools or they're just starting their Ds. So that's one of the reasons why the saber events start early, to give them access to the replay pods early. And if they were scheduled later, they would probably be waiting a bit for the replay pods to become available.
All right, Dan Burke, thank you so much for your time today and going through not just the tournament scheduling process, but also a little bit of fencing time and how it was formed. Really fascinating and gave us a nice behind the scenes of your work and the work of so many people to make these tournaments happen. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Glad to share the info and hopefully give people a better understanding of why things are scheduled the way they are. And while that may not it might answer people's questions, at least as to why, which it's, at least people know that it's not being done randomly. There's a
Right.
reason behind everything.
Yeah, there's a method to all the madness that happens behind the scenes at a tournament. And for those of you who are just listening and want to see the video version of this, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. And yeah, Fencing Time Live is your source for all things fencing tournament related. So I assume everybody listening or watching is very familiar with that site. And the FIE, if you're listening, let's just make every tournament be run on Fencing Time. That's my parting thoughts. No shade to the other providers out there, but like I said earlier, when I see it in international tournaments using Fencing Time, I breathe a sigh of relief, I got to say. Well, Dan, thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
Okay. See you at nationals.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Thank you.